What's up, guys? Sean Kelly with Cutting Edge Contracting here, and today we're talking about window details and flashing and why it's a really good idea to strongly consider doing your windows at the same time as your siding project. So what you can see here is we've got a few new windows that are brand new installed, and what I want you to pay close attention to is the flashing and the WRB that we have around the perimeter of the window. So once these new windows get installed, obviously they get fastened and there's caulking between the windows and the sheathing. And then we go through and then we've got all of the moisture barrier and then all of our flashing tape that all integrates for a fully integrated weather resistive barrier on the exterior shell of the home. So one of the things that you need to consider here is when you're doing this and you're getting into a remodel and you've got 20, 25, even 30-year-old windows, it's a very, very good idea to go through and cash in on this potential savings that you can get and the much, much better job that can be done when you do the windows at the same time. So this is typically, if we weren't going to go through and replace the windows at the same time, these old windows would still be in here. We would go through, tear everything off, and then we'd put our moisture barrier and we would go through and reflash all of the windows, okay? Now, what ends up happening is if you were gonna go through and do the window project after all of this, let's say a few years down the line, what'll end up happening is when we finish all of our siding, we're gonna go through, we're gonna install trim, we're gonna do all of the siding that butts up to it, we'll get our Z-metal flashing in here, everything will get caulked, and then we'll go through and do the finish paint job. Now what ends up happening is if you decide to do your window project after the fact, you'll come through, and in order to replace these windows, you'll end up having to go through and pull off the trim. So normally you'll have probably a 4-inch piece of trim that's here. Sometimes with some of these bays, you actually may end up having a full piece that's integrated. But you go through and you have to pull off all of the trim. You typically end up having to fish out some of the Z-metal potentially. You usually want to update that. And when you cut into it, you're going to be going through, and in order to get this window out, you've got a nail fin here, and you have to pull all of this off. So you're cutting into your moisture barrier, you're cutting into the tape in order to pull these windows, and then you're limited on your ability to be able to get extra flashing in here. So just imagine if we had all of this was sided and you only have a 4-inch area here where your trim is going to cover at the end. When you try to go through and then put in new flashing tape, you're going to have a butt joint here, basically where the old flashing tape and the new stuff basically goes through and meets up, and that's an area that you have for potential issues in the future. All of the time on your weather resistive barriers, even just this moisture barrier here, there are minimum overlaps for all of this stuff to make sure that you don't have water mitigation, water issues getting in behind all of your moisture barriers. So this is a very, very critical detail here, and in order to get the absolute best job possible, you definitely want to be doing all of this at the same time and not going through and tearing into this after all of this hard work is done to flash and protect the siding during the siding project. So something to consider there. The other piece of this is that there's an opportunity for massive cost savings when you do the windows at the same time. This job in particular, we had some old LP siding that was on here, and a lot of times what ends up happening is if your home gets a little bit too far past where you're upkeeping on that regular maintenance, a lot of times you get caulking joints that open up, water gets in behind it, particularly with some of these older homes that have either LP siding or are sheeted with OSB. What ends up happening is if you go and wait too long, once we go through and we tear off all that siding, we tear off the moisture barrier, many, many times what you'll see is that there'll actually be, and I think we have this documented in some other videos, lots of dry rot that comes out right here in the corners where the water just kind of weeps down behind where it gets in the trim and whatnot. And so a lot of times when we go through in the process of doing the siding, when we discover dry rot on the sheathing like that, we have to go through and replace it. So what that entails in the middle of a siding project is actually going through and pulling your windows. Even if you're not replacing them, those windows need to come out in order for us to be able to go through, replace the sheathing, and then reinstall the old windows. So for that, if you're going to go through and you're going to potentially run into issues like that, there's an opportunity where a majority of the labor is pretty much already going to be occurring. Just instead of pulling out the old window and putting it back in, you're installing a new window and being able to basically rejuvenate and then not have to tear into any of this. On top of that, if you consider what ends up the rest of the finishing pieces for that window job, if you decide to do it after the siding, you're going to pull off trim, you're going to go through once the new window's installed, you try to piece together this moisture barrier again, then you have to go through, reinstall trim, caulk everything, and then you have to do paint touch-ups. Not only you have to do paint touch-ups on the trim, you have some siding paint touch-ups, depending on how long it's been since the siding and paint job happened. you know, sometimes there's some color differences. You get some fading. It's not always easy to match. And then you're going through and you have to spend all of this extra time and money to go through and actually piece together and finish all of that by doing the finish painting. So a lot of times if you go through and you do your windows at the same time as the siding, there is a massive cost savings potential of actually up to about 40% of what that independent window project would take after the fact as compared to doing it at the same time as the siding. So make sure that when you're getting into something, you consider all possibilities, and if there's an opportunity that works for your budget, works for the timing, and works for the long-term plan of your home, we'll definitely give you some advice and you should consider it.